Hi, I'm Mike Taylor, Minister of Churnside, linked with Hutton, Fishick and Paxton parish churches. Like a lot of people, the past few weeks have really been focused on how do we care for those who are vulnerable in our society. It is good to preach sermons, but the challenge over the past 3 months has been, how do we live our faith, not just speak our faith? And maybe that should be a challenge we face more and more. But it has really focused us. How do we care for the needy in our communities? And so, in our community, we started out with a small resilience group of volunteers who were collecting groceries and delivering them to people who were shielding. We started delivering prescription medicines to folk. And quite soon, our community was secure in their food supply. And then we started to think about, what about those who don't have finances, those whose income is impacted by COVID? What about them? And so we saw this as an opportunity to start a community larder. We arranged food donations, we set up our community centre, we put out leaflets to our community, and 3 days a week now we have 20, 30, 40 people coming to the larder to get food. And while we were establishing it, the questions were, on what principles would we do so? Many people have set up food banks where people come in, those who are in need, and receive a parcel or two of food. And we decided to go a different route. We liked the larder concept, where people in the community could give according to their means and receive according to their needs. It was not just about those in dire straits getting food, but it was also a way of building community, that anyone in the community could come and participate, receive and give. And that has worked really, really well. It has also helped us to cut down on food waste. And so one of the questions we faced quite early on was, would we have any boundaries, any fences, any limitation on who could receive and how much they could receive? And our agreement from the get-go was anyone could receive as much as they were able to take. We knew there would be people who would abuse this, and yet we believe there's enough food to go around, and that when people realize that there is enough to go around, people will no longer feel the need to hoard, but will rather just take what they need. And that has proved to be true over the past few weeks. What I have found quite interesting is how we respond to those who come to receive food. You see, for me, this is a theological issue, and it comes down to our understanding of grace. Grace is unmerited favor. It's receiving a gift, not because we've done something to deserve it, actually not even because we're the right kind of person, but simply because someone chooses to love us. Someone chooses to give us something. You see, we often speak of grace in church, in sermons, and when we do, we're usually thinking about one day when we get to heaven and Jesus meets us at the pearly gates and he gives us enough grace to cover all the sins we have committed in our lives. But is that a deep enough understanding of grace? Does Jesus not pray for things to be on earth as they are in heaven? If that is so, then should grace not abound even in this lifetime? And so how does grace influence how we work as a charity, how we share food with each other? You see, I've noticed that sometimes someone who has high status in our community, maybe someone who owns one of the bigger houses, drives a better car, dresses really well, maybe has had a good job somewhere. Those people are treated warmly as they come through the door. They are pampered to. Often we're saying to them, have a little bit more. Take some extra potatoes. Take some carrots. We had an overload of courgettes last week, and we would be saying, please, just take some more courgettes. Because you see, those people we deem really valuable. And so what we're not practicing is we're not practicing grace, but we're still in our charity practicing a merit-based system, because we see these people as worth a lot more. And then we have those who come in who maybe don't dress as well, whose homes are maybe a bit run down. And how are they treated? What breaks my heart is that with them we try to slow down how much they take. We say, take a little less. You know, can you leave some for others? And then sometimes when they leave, there's the conversation of, oh, did you see how much was taken? You see, even in our being charitable, we're not really gracious, because we're judging people as having greater or lesser value. And so even the rewards of charity are based on merit. And so the question is that how Jesus does it? Is that how Jesus dispenses grace? Does Jesus look at the rich man and say, wow, you must be a good guy. I can see by your clothes that you're deserving. And so does Jesus give more grace to that person? Does Jesus look at the person who's prospering and say, I can see by all the evidence that God must like you, and so I'm going to be kind and generous to you because God's already doing that? Actually, he doesn't. He treats the rich and the poor the same. He eats at both their tables. He has conversations with all of them. He offers love and healing to the rich and the poor alike. He doesn't discriminate. He offers grace unconditionally. You see, sometimes we think in a Darwinian way that those who make all the right decisions will be the most blessed. And to some degree, there may be truth in that. But you see, some people don't start on an even playing field. For some, they start disadvantaged and are trying to make up for that. A friend of mine was born to two parents who were deaf. So growing up was awkward. She didn't socialize much. She didn't have many friends. She was naive. And the result of her naivete is that as a teenager, she got into a relationship too early with a young man and fell pregnant. Without parents to guide her, she decided to marry this young man to give her child a home. She got married and had another child 2 or 3 years later, and the relationship didn't work out. The young man who she married struggled with the responsibility. They were too young, too insecure and immature in themselves, and the marriage fell apart. And so my friend was a young mother in her early 20s with 2 children under the age of 5, trying to make a way in the world. And so she went from rented accommodation to rented accommodation. Her car was an old banger that was barely held together. And yet she was doing all she could to raise her children. The tragedy is that when people saw her, they were not quick to care for her. Instead, they judged her, often said she should have made better decisions, and withheld charity from her. By contrast, a friend of mine who was a wealthy businessman was on a flight the one day when he had a mild heart attack. He lived the perfect life. He had the perfect house, he had the perfect children, he had the perfect car. He had built a successful business. And so when he was hospitalized for a couple of days, everyone scurried around to care for him, to make sure he was okay. People were taking meals to his home. People were visiting him in hospital. People were asking if they could help with the children. Why the difference? Do we consider one person more valuable than another? Do we think that merit determines who should receive grace? If we think that, the mistake is not in the people we're perceiving. The mistake is with us. It is not in them, it is the log in our own eye. You see, every person bears the image of God. And so as we care for the least of those in society, we are caring for God in society. As we care for the wealthiest in society, we are still caring for God in society. Because grace steps outside of karma, it steps outside of merit, and grace is for everybody. So, how do we keep the fences in place? When it comes to grace, we have had different theological positions. Some have said God chooses from on high, and those who are blessed, and those who aren't. And we just got to accept what God says. Others say a lot of it depends on our response. God's grace is available and accessible to every single person. But our response to God's grace is what makes the difference. The sun shines on the righteous and the unrighteous. But those who are wise make hay while the sun shines. The third position is less about questioning who deserves and more about questioning who needs. Who in your community needs to be loved? Who in your community needs to be cared for? Surely it is better to give food to a hungry person than to give food to someone who is already full. Surely the giving of grace is not about merit, but far more about need. So a few questions for us. Where do we need grace? Where do you need grace in your life? Maybe in a lot of areas you're doing really well, and yet in others you are struggling. Maybe it's being able to put your hand up and say, I need a little bit of help. I need a bit of support. Maybe it's being able to receive the grace that is given to us. Then to look around us and say, who needs around me? What do they need? So that our grace can be specific and appropriate to each person. Not because of deserving, but because when we look at others, we see the image of God. Not to judge on past, but to believe in a future where people can thrive, where people can start over, where people can be so much more content than they have been in the past. When Jesus prayed, his prayer was that it would be on earth as it is in heaven. Maybe grace is about life after death, but surely grace is about life before death as well. So may God bless you. May you be gracious, giving unmerited favor, unjudging favor to others. And may God bless you with grace. May you receive from others according to your needs, and may you give according to your means. Amen.